Ask any high performer the one habit they won't give up, whether it's a CEO, startup founder, or pro athlete, and you'll notice a pattern. They meditate. Many top leaders like Ray Dalio, Oprah Winfrey, and Jack Dorsey openly credit it as part of their routine. The big question is, why? What do they know that most people don't? In today's masterclass, I'll show you how research shows meditation produces measurable changes in brain networks tied to decision-making, focus, and stress regulation. And no, it doesn't take hours or rituals. I'll show you a 5-minute routine that fits into real work days. Stay with me. By the end, you'll have something practical you can try between emails. Most people only think of meditation as sitting in silence to relax. But that surface-level view misses the real story. The hidden link between meditation and your brain's power. What makes meditation so powerful for the mind is the way it interacts with the brain's core systems. Neuroscience shows that regular mindfulness practice is linked to increases in gray matter density and stronger connectivity in key prefrontal areas, the regions right behind your forehead that handle planning, decision-making, and emotional control. Just as important, studies also observe reduced reactivity in the amygdala, the center that fires up when you're stressed or triggered. In other words, this practice doesn't just calm you down in the moment. Over time, it reshapes the wiring that determines how you think and respond. Why does that matter for work? Because the prefrontal cortex is the command center for your professional life. When it functions effectively, you make clear decisions under pressure, guide your team with steady judgment, and stay focused even through constant interruptions. But if that system is undertrained or fatigued, the opposite happens. Attention drifts, hesitation multiplies, and self-doubt creeps in just when strong direction is needed. It's not about intelligence or talent. Your output follows the state of this control hub. Strengthen it, and you strengthen everything else. To put it simply, trying to compete at today's pace with an untrained mind is like running modern software on a processor from 20 years ago. The computer boots, but the lag is constant. In our professional lives, we rely on caffeine, apps, and multitasking to push through that lag, but the brain isn't designed to work indefinitely under that load. The effect is predictable: burnout, brain fog, and errors that compound under stress. Meditation offers a way to keep the system updated, not by forcing willpower, but by optimizing the circuits behind attention and resilience. This shift is especially important in the landscape we're living in now. In 2025, demands on cognition are relentless. Artificial intelligence tools accelerate timelines, global markets push decisions to happen instantly, and constant digital inputs create an environment where mental bandwidth never feels wide enough. Many professionals approach that reality by stretching schedules later into the night or doubling stimulants during the day. But the true bottleneck isn't hours or energy. It's whether the brain's control systems can filter and direct what matters most. That is the precise gap meditation addresses. The evidence isn't abstract. For instance, a large randomized workplace trial with around 1,400 employees found that an 8-week digital meditation program significantly reduced perceived stress, and those effects lasted months after the program ended. Results like that explain why professions outside of wellness are adopting these techniques. It's not about chasing a mystical experience. It's about results that affect day-to-day performance, decision-making, and overall effectiveness at work. Of course, these upgrades don't lock in after 1 or 2 sessions. Neuroscientists emphasize that the observed changes in gray matter or connectivity develop over repeated practice. Just like physical stamina is built over weeks of training, mental clarity compounds over time. A few minutes of consistent practice each day generates effects that emerge gradually: greater focus, quicker recovery from setbacks, and steadier emotional regulation when the pressure spikes. What makes this approach counterintuitive is that progress comes from slowing down, not speeding up. Sitting quietly, detaching briefly from inputs, and directing attention with intent builds the very circuits that help you act faster and think more clearly later. It's like strengthening the core muscles of the mind. That daily pause prevents distractions from scattering you and shortens the time it takes to get back on track when interruptions happen. Measured against hours of wasted effort from scattered focus, the return on those minutes is significant. Think about how top athletes obsessively train in repetition to shape muscle memory so that when the competition moment arrives, their movements are automatic. Meditation works the same way for thought processes. Slowing down in practice conditions the brain for performance. In real-life moments, a negotiation, a boardroom pitch, or a crisis meeting, the payoff is immediate access to clarity and judgment without being consumed by stress. This also reframes productivity. The older mindset was about squeezing every bit of time from the calendar. The newer understanding is that the quality of mental processing is the true limit. You can extend your workday, but eventually the brain slips if the prefrontal cortex isn't given the training and recovery it needs. Coffee can mask that slip for a while, but it can't replace structural upgrades. Meditation fills that role by keeping the brain's management systems agile when demand climbs. And while different practices yield different experiences, the consistent conclusion across research is that attention, emotional stability, and decision-making improve when you train systematically. These aren't abstract benefits. They show up when your inbox spikes with urgent requests, when deadlines compress, and when you need to choose between competing priorities without being paralyzed by stress. Meditation is the practice that allows you to keep those circuits online when you need them most. So the deeper story of meditation isn't about a ritual or a serene moment. It's about upgrading the brain's operating system in a world that challenges it daily. This is what turns minutes of stillness into hours of effective, creative work. And for high performers under constant pressure, that difference determines whether they stay sharp in complexity or get pulled under by it. Which brings us to a key question. If the science of these benefits is so strong, why do many of the world's most effective leaders claim it as central to their success, while others still hesitate to even try it? Why CEOs and creators swear by it? You start to notice a striking pattern when you examine how the most effective leaders, creators, and performers manage their lives. It isn't only about how many hours they work or the specific strategies they follow. Across very different fields, one practice keeps surfacing. Athletes with demanding schedules rely on it before competitions. Artists across disciplines describe it as a way to unlock creativity when the work stalls. Executives responsible for global teams mention how it steadies them when decisions become overwhelming. The habit they share is meditation. What makes it surprising is that the people we usually associate with relentless drive and constant activity commit to a practice that requires stopping, sitting, and clearing space. The busiest individuals, under the most pressure, carve out time for stillness. This runs counter to what most of us expect. Productivity is usually framed as squeezing more tasks into each day or running harder to get further. But leaders consistently send another message. Performance improves when you create a pause. Former LinkedIn CEO Jeff Weiner has explained that meditation allowed him to lead with more compassion and clarity. Ray Dalio, founder of Bridgewater Associates, credits it with better decision-making under enormous financial pressure. Arianna Huffington has spoken about how meditation helps her step away from reactivity and approach choices with perspective. These are not people looking for mystical escapes. They are grounding their mental performance in a practice that directly supports results. So if the evidence is clear at the top of industries, why doesn't it spread faster across workplaces? The barrier often lies in perception. Many professionals still imagine extreme versions of meditation, sitting cross-legged in silence for hours, chanting, or engaging in a strictly spiritual ritual. The National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health notes this stereotype is misleading because the actual techniques are brief and highly adaptable. Yet those images are enough for many to write meditation off before they begin. They assume that productivity comes only from doing more, not by pausing. The misunderstanding keeps meditation filed under personal wellness, rather than seeing it as a practical performance tool. The difference for leaders who practice is not subtle. What appears from outside as a few quiet minutes leads to hours of sharper execution later. Harvard Business Review summarized the appeal clearly. Executives choose meditation not to escape, but to heighten focus and manage emotion. They view it as training the same way athletes view conditioning. Instead of pouring every ounce of energy into reacting, they cultivate poise, which allows them to act with steady judgment even under shifting conditions. High performers are not waiting until burnout forces the shift. They deliberately cultivate resilience because they know it expands their long-term capacity. Skepticism, however, still dominates in many workplaces. Employees wonder aloud whether 5 or 10 minutes can really make a difference, but comparisons help clarify. No athlete would dismiss rehearsing form simply because practice takes less time than a full game. In the same way, meditation sessions may look minor, but the mental conditioning multiplies when the pressure arrives. Consistency reshapes how focus operates when distractions spike. Leaders demonstrate it not because they have surplus time, but because they treat it as the foundation that protects all the hours to come. The more closely you look, the less surprising it becomes that CEOs and creators defend this habit. By quieting the constant background noise of reactive thought, they can think more strategically. By intercepting emotional overreaction, they protect working relationships. By giving the brain rhythm between activity and pause, they sustain energy through long periods of demand. Productivity no longer depends on sheer willpower. It grows out of the condition of the system running all their judgments. That is why the message repeats so often across industries. Leaders do not promote meditation as an optional extra. They describe it in the same category as sleep or exercise, a core part of sustaining high output. They rely on it because it prevents decision fatigue, clears room for vision, and enables consistent emotional regulation. They practice not because it connects them to tradition, but because day by day it builds the clarity that sustains results. What shifts when we recognize this pattern is how we define effectiveness. Meditation is not about slowing the trajectory of a career. It is about sharpening the tools that allow that career to move forward at full pace without breakdown. Seen in that light, the idea that stillness could outperform endless motion becomes less paradoxical. It starts to look like the obvious adjustment. And this raises the next question. If stopping briefly can actually expand productivity, how exactly does that work? How can pausing and doing less give you the ability to accomplish more, faster, with greater precision? The science of slowing down to speed up. The science points to something important. Meditation works by slowing patterns in order to restore efficiency. This principle, slowing down to speed up, sounds counterintuitive at first, but the evidence reveals why it matters so much in daily performance. We're taught to think that productivity comes from stacking more hours, grinding harder, and reacting as fast as possible. But what constant activity creates is mental friction. Errors, distractions, and repeated corrections. Meditation interrupts that loop. In just a few minutes, stillness restores clarity, reduces wasted effort, and allows output to become cleaner and faster. The difference starts with how professionals usually define hard work. In high-pressure settings, the default is to measure commitment by time at the desk. When setbacks appear, the instinct is to push even longer, patch mistakes later, and sacrifice recovery. That cycle feels like dedication, but under the surface the brain is straining. Attention scatters, decisions drag out, and the cost of constant rework builds. The habit of overwork hides that inefficiency, so people rarely notice until burnout arrives. Meditation cuts into that cycle. Instead of pushing by force, it retrains the mind to reset and redirect attention smoothly. Ironically, those minutes of quiet often return far more time than staying late ever would. Controlled research helps make this visible. Workplace trials and controlled studies show trained practitioners return to focus faster after interruptions and make fewer attention-related errors. A randomized workplace trial reported significantly lower perceived stress and improved job strain measures. Those findings highlight something important. Productivity isn't only about how long you sit down to work, but how much of that time your brain is actually operating at full capacity. Meditation saves hours not by adding them, but by recovering clarity before drift or error slows everything down. Attention consistency is another piece of the puzzle. Without training, most professionals experience mental spikes and crashes, brief periods of strong focus followed by long dips of distraction. This uneven rhythm makes projects unstable. A few minutes of mindfulness a day flatten those swings. The result is steadier concentration for longer stretches and a more reliable rhythm even in chaotic environments. That doesn't make work mechanical, it simply reduces drag. A coder can keep working without introducing major mistakes. A lawyer can stay present across hours of review. A designer can sustain clarity to finish before deadlines collapse into last-minute scrambles. The edge isn't mystical, it's structural. Part of the challenge is visibility. 5 minutes of stillness doesn't show up in a progress tracker. It creates invisible savings, errors avoided, recoveries shortened, details caught the first time. Over weeks, those savings compound into major performance gains, but because they aren't immediately obvious, most people dismiss the practice as lost time. The paradox is that skipping stillness appears productive in the moment, but steadily costs more over the long run. The explanation sits in how the brain manages stress. Under pressure, cortisol and adrenaline spike. In the short term, this sharpens awareness, but if levels stay elevated too long, clarity breaks down, memory slips, small details vanish, and decisions become reactive instead of strategic. Meditation lowers baseline reactivity. That means professionals conserve their energy, staying clearer for longer without exhausting the system. In practical terms, they last through complex work without spiraling into fatigue. It's like shifting a vehicle into a more efficient gear. The destination is reached at the same pace, but fuel isn't burned unnecessarily. Equating hours with success is one of the biggest misconceptions in professional culture. Countless people grind late into the night, assuming exhaustion equals achievement. Data suggests otherwise. Studies of mindfulness participants show improved accuracy and faster problem completion compared to peers who worked straight through fatigue. That doesn't reduce the value of hard work, it reframes it. Effort accompanied by strategic recovery delivers more than pure endurance. Meditation provides a method for that recovery. Rather than avoiding effort, it optimizes when and how the mind deploys its best resources. Examples appear across industries. In tech, creators report fewer lapses during rapid coding cycles. In law, practitioners notice fewer overlooked clauses during long case reviews. In creative teams, individuals sustain flow without constant digital breaks. The difference to outsiders looks like slowing down. Colleagues leave their desks for a pause. But when pressure moments arrive, a pitch, a deadline, a negotiation, those same people respond quicker and with greater precision. Stillness beforehand creates speed afterward. At first, giving those minutes feels like a loss. In reality, they create a timing advantage. Workers who pause shorten their recovery gap after distractions and commit fewer mistakes requiring rework. Those who refuse the pause extend their schedule but deplete clarity until performance erodes. Eventually, patterns of overtime, missed deadlines, and stress-related illness show the true cost. Meditation creates quiet spaces small enough to fit into cramped calendars, but large enough to shift overall capability. What looks like subtraction turns into leverage. This simplicity is often overlooked. Professionals spend heavily on scheduling apps, time trackers, and project frameworks, but none of those tools matter if the core operating system, the brain, is stuck in high drag mode. Meditation doesn't manage your email or file your paperwork, it upgrades the system running every task. Instead of adding complexity, it removes friction. That friction reduction shows up as sharper focus, faster recovery from mistakes, and more consistent decision-making during uncertainty. By training clarity, the simplest intervention produces the greatest compound return. The broader principle is important to underline. Slowing down isn't about indulgence, retreat, or avoiding the challenges of work. It is a performance method. A few minutes of meditation reset attention, regulate stress responses, and prepare the brain for the next high-demand block. The return isn't measured in theory. It comes as projects finished with fewer revisions, reduced fatigue at the end of the day, and a mind steady enough to strategize even in chaos. The science of slowing down becomes inseparable from the practice of high performance. Now the question shifts from theory to practice. It is one thing to understand that stillness conditions the mind. It is another to know how to apply it in a schedule full of demands. Want to try a 60-second reset that produces a noticeable difference before your next meeting? That's where we turn next. A simple framework you can start immediately and fit inside a workday that already feels too full. Beginner's Guide, 5 minutes that can outperform coffee. The objection always arrives right away. I don't have time. On the surface, this seems sensible. Your day is already crowded with emails, meetings, deadlines, and responsibilities waiting at home. Adding yet another activity sounds far from realistic. But this assumption that meditation requires drawn-out sessions in a quiet retreat is what prevents people from discovering its usefulness. The truth is that 5 minutes of focused practice can sharpen your focus and lift energy more effectively than another cup of coffee. The time commitment is smaller than a quick scroll on your phone, but the return is mental clarity that continues long after the session is finished. Even brief daily sessions have documented benefits for attention and stress, which means small steps can deliver measurable impact without demanding lifestyle overhauls. So how does a simple 5-minute session actually work? Picture it as 3 distinct moves, short and easy to remember. First, breathing. Give yourself 30 to 45 seconds to notice the inhale through your nose, the pause, and the exhale through your mouth. Don't try to control it right away, just follow the natural rhythm. Then, once you're settled, make the breath slightly slower. Let the exhale stretch for an extra second. This small adjustment signals your nervous system that it can calm down. Second comes the body scan. Take 1 to 2 minutes to notice sensations without judging them. Start with your shoulders. Are they tense, raised, or heavy? Let them soften. Move attention down to your chest, stomach, legs, and finally into your feet. You're not trying to fix or improve these areas. You're simply noticing. Most professionals move through full days without realizing how much tension they accumulate. The scan brings awareness back to parts of the body that have been ignored. Often that awareness itself is enough for muscles to release. Third is the reset. In the final 30 seconds, let the breath return to its natural rhythm. Notice how the body feels compared to when you started. Maybe it's looser, or maybe the shift is subtle. Watch the quality of your thinking. Instead of scattered, there's often a steadier, clearer baseline. At this point, gently open your eyes. Take 1 extra breath before you stand, and then return to your responsibilities. That's the entire sequence. 3 breaths, 2 scans, 1 reset. No chance, no special props, no mountain ritual. It's a framework you can use in a chair at work, on a short break, or even while sitting in your parked car. The simplicity is intentional. Many people imagine meditation as long, complicated, or inaccessible. Images of incense, darkened rooms, or secret mantras can make even motivated beginners hesitate. But none of these elements are necessary for the benefits in the brain to appear. You don't need special equipment, and you don't need absolute silence. What creates benefit is the habit, stepping out of reactivity for a few minutes and focusing attention on something controllable, like breath or body awareness. The lack of complexity is what allows this practice to fit into busy schedules. Another misunderstanding comes from how people think thoughts should behave. Many say, "I can't meditate, my mind won't stop racing." They assume that endless thinking means they are bad at it. But minds are built to think. The goal is not to stop thought. It's to notice thought and choose where to place attention, again and again. If your mind drifts away a dozen times, but you redirect it each time, you have trained focus 12 times. That cycle is not failure. It is the training itself. For beginners, this reframing changes everything. Instead of waiting for perfect silence or a blank mind, you can begin exactly as you are, with constant distractions included. Skeptics might say 5 minutes sounds too small to produce real effects. But research shows that even a single short session can reduce perceived stress and increase focus in the hours immediately afterward. The change won't always feel dramatic, but it leaves a subtle imprint that shapes how you bring attention back when interruptions happen later in the day. Compare it with caffeine. A cup of coffee provides a burst of stimulation, but the lift fades and often drops into a slump. By contrast, 5 minutes of deliberate stillness doesn't spike your system. It reduces wasted mental effort, so your energy lasts longer. You're not adding more fuel, you're clearing the engine of friction. Practical timing matters. When can you realistically fit this in? Lunch breaks are an obvious opportunity. Just before grabbing food, pause for 5 minutes and reset. The second half of the day won't pile on top of the first with the same weight. Another strategy is evening practice. If you tend to carry stress into bed, spend 5 minutes before brushing your teeth. That short reset separates the demands of the day from your night, making sleep easier to enter. You can also anchor the habit to existing routines, like beginning right after your morning coffee or taking the break before your first meeting starts. For a younger professional rushing between morning classes and work, the moment before the commute can be effective. Anchors like these help 5 minutes become automatic rather than another item you have to remember. Over time, some may decide to lengthen the practice, but there is no requirement to do so. You don't have to aspire to marathon sittings or an entirely new lifestyle. The real purpose is smaller. Stop autopilot, train attention, and return to your responsibilities sharper than you left them. A short reset changes the trajectory of the next few hours in ways longer strategies often fail to do. Think of how coffee culture grew. It became normal to pause for a drink not just for taste, but for the perceived energy and focus. Meditation at this scale becomes a parallel habit, a form of clarity that doesn't crash. Once someone experiences even one short session, the misconception that it is time-consuming or mystic fades quickly. They realize it's practical training for the brain, like a quick stretch for the body. Athletes stretch to protect muscles from injury. When you stretch attention for 5 minutes, you prevent small mental strains that would otherwise cost you time later. Most people tolerate this practice well, but it's worth mentioning a caution supported by the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health. A small percentage of individuals do report negative experiences. If you ever find yourself feeling intense emotional distress instead of calm, stop the session and consult with a professional. Practicing responsibly means noticing not only your focus, but also your emotional state and taking care of it. Because the practice is so accessible, the better question becomes whether you are willing to use it. Next time you feel the urge to refill your mug late in the afternoon, consider giving those minutes to meditation once instead. The experiment is low risk. 5 minutes is insignificant on a clock, but significant for performance. And every repeated session strengthens the neural circuits that support clarity, focus, and resilience. Over time, the impact is less about the session itself and more about what it prevents. You catch distractions earlier. You avoid rushing into reactive words in meetings. You trim the energy drain that constant tension usually creates. Quiet resets build a margin of composure you can rely on. That margin is what professionals describe when they say meditation made them better leaders, better creators, and steadier under pressure. The clearest takeaway is that stillness is not wasted time. It is a practice that pays back far more than it costs. By anchoring 5 minutes into the natural pauses of your day, you create space for sharper focus and steadier energy without sacrificing hours. And this small shift lays the foundation for tackling one of the biggest challenges professionals underestimate every day: how much hidden pressure stress actually adds to their performance and their health. Stress is sabotaging you more than you think. Stress is one of those factors that shapes professional life in ways most people underestimate. It shows up during tight deadlines, high-stakes meetings, or even the simple overwhelm of an overflowing inbox. In those moments, the body releases cortisol, a stress hormone designed to sharpen your senses and prime reactions for immediate demands. In acute bursts, cortisol can be useful, almost like a temporary adrenaline edge, but when pressure continues and cortisol remains elevated for hours or days, it shifts from helpful to harmful. Research shows that chronic stress and elevated cortisol are linked to impaired memory, poorer decision-making, and reduced creative thinking. Instead of protecting your performance, persistent stress sabotages the very cognitive strengths you depend on most. The consequences extend beyond focus. Under sustained stress, clarity slips and small errors multiply. Reports that once seemed manageable end up with missing details. Presentations stumble. Conversations turn more reactive. Creativity dims because the brain, stuck in survival mode, narrows attention to immediate threats rather than generating new ideas. The irony is sharp. The stress you think is pushing you to perform harder is steadily undermining your ability to perform well. In professional settings, that decline doesn't announce itself loudly. It arrives as gradual inefficiency. Work feels harder, output looks weaker, and yet the cycle keeps repeating. Culturally, many professionals power through these declines as if stress were proof of dedication. Late nights and relentless responsiveness are misread as commitment. But what looks like discipline is often erosion in disguise. Elevated cortisol left unchecked interferes not just with concentration, but also with sleep, emotional regulation, and immune function. Healthline and NCCIH both note that chronic activation of this stress pathway can leave lasting effects on physical well-being, from blood pressure changes to increased vulnerability to illness. These downstream costs don't appear instantly, which is precisely why they're overlooked. The work gets done in the short term, but over the long term, the system wears down. The idea that ignoring stress somehow demonstrates resilience is misleading. Stress affects physiology whether or not you acknowledge it. Pretending it doesn't matter doesn't stop hormones from altering focus, mood, or motivation. A better analogy is a warning light on a car dashboard. You can cover it with tape and drive on, but that doesn't solve the issue under the hood. Burnout often feels sudden for exactly this reason. It appears as collapse after months of invisible buildup. What seemed like strength was simply accumulating strain. Where meditation enters the picture is in its ability to reshape the stress response at the level of the nervous system. Rather than acting only as a distraction, it builds mechanisms that reduce the intensity of stress and improve recovery between stressful moments. Regular practice has been shown to lower baseline cortisol levels, which means the inevitable spikes from challenges are smaller and clear faster. Even better, review-level evidence indicates mindfulness programs reduce stress and can lower blood pressure in some populations. This adds scientific weight to what many practitioners report personally, a steadier state that resists being pulled into panic or reactivity. And here's the direct benefit. Regular short practice protects your ability to make fewer mistakes and stay creative under pressure. Blood pressure is one of the clearest daily markers. In a high-pressure workplace, heart rate and blood pressure rise repeatedly, keeping the body on constant alert. Meditation counters that by activating the parasympathetic nervous system, the body's natural recovery switch. When this system is active, heart rate slows, breathing steadies, and the body regains balance. Over time, consistent practice can lead to lower average blood pressure and reduced cardiovascular strain. These aren't just health statistics. They alter how you think under pressure. When the body feels slightly calmer, the brain has room to evaluate options instead of collapsing into tunnel vision. In real workplace terms, that difference is whether you calmly manage a heated negotiation or lose perspective in the middle of it. Consider the impact on productivity. Strained attention leads to repeated corrections, which add invisible hours to projects. Sleepless nights fueled by stress make tomorrow's work sluggish. Each wave of unaddressed stress bleeds into the next, stacking mistakes on top of fatigue. The false logic says, if I stop, I'll lose time. The concrete reality is the opposite. Skipping recovery costs more time than it saves. Meditation provides an efficient counter. A few minutes restores more working capacity than running one more exhausted hour. Seen this way, it becomes less about philosophy and more about return on effort. The misconception that combating stress requires major lifestyle changes creates another barrier. Retreats, vacations, or lengthy programs feel unrealistic to busy professionals, so they keep pushing through the pressure. Yet adaptation can happen through small, deliberate steps. Just as a few daily lifts with a lightweight condition muscles over time, a few minutes of mindful practice condition the nervous system to rebound faster. This is precisely what makes meditation unique. It trains resilience in increments. Instead of waiting for burnout to hit, you build a buffer that prevents burnout from arriving at all. When viewed from a distance, the lesson becomes sharper. Stress operates quietly, undermining performance, even as it convinces you to equate strain with progress. Across companies and industries, this pattern spreads like attacks on productivity. The people who perform best are often those who refuse to treat stress as an unavoidable part of ambition. They recognize it as a physiological drag and invest in practices that regulate it. Meditation is one of the most reliable of those practices. By lowering cortisol and supporting nervous system balance, it doesn't just improve mental clarity short term, it creates structural protection that accumulates over time. The message for professionals isn't abstract. The next time stress takes hold before a big meeting or deadline, understand it as more than discomfort. It's an active process, shortening your attention span, narrowing creativity, and pushing your body into overdrive. Simply grinding through will amplify those effects. Choosing instead to pause, even briefly, builds a habit that maintains your competence when pressure peaks. Over weeks and months, those moments act as compound interest for your mind's resilience. And while science provides evidence, what keeps people using this practice is its day-to-day payoff. Steadier memory means fewer embarrassing mistakes. A calmer baseline means more confidence during presentations. Reduced reactivity means stronger relationships in high-pressure teams. These are the markers that translate directly into better professional outcomes. Resilience doesn't arrive after collapse. It's trained before collapse ever has the chance to appear. With this in mind, the challenge isn't whether meditation works. It's whether people are willing to admit it fits into their daily schedules. And here, another layer of resistance often emerges. For many, the hesitation isn't really about time, but about perception. Meditation still carries cultural myths that make busy professionals dismiss it too quickly. Those myths and the objections they create are what we need to look at next. Busting the myths, why meditation isn't just for monks. Whenever professionals hear the word meditation, the same misunderstandings seem to surface. Some assume it's too hard, others insist they don't have time, and many still picture it as an activity reserved for monks chanting in remote temples. These ideas are persistent, but they don't hold up under closer inspection. They spread not because they're true, but because they make it easier to dismiss a practice that challenges the overwork norms we've grown comfortable with. If you think meditation automatically means incense and chanting, fine, that's an option, but it's not a prerequisite. What actually matters is how the practice reshapes focus, not the image you attach to it. Take the first myth, I can't do it, my mind won't stop racing. The reality is simple. A wandering mind isn't failure, it's the starting point. In today's environment of endless notifications and mental multitasking, distraction is the default state. Attention requires training, just like muscles require resistance. Neuroscience confirms that the very act of noticing your mind, drifting and redirecting it, strengthens the prefrontal cortex, the area tied to focus and emotional control. So when beginners think they're failing because thoughts keep coming, they've actually already begun training the muscle most professionals need the most. What feels like imperfection in meditation is the workout itself. Now for the second myth, I don't have time. Look closely at how people already spend their days. A few minutes vanish scrolling a newsfeed, sitting in a coffee line, or rereading emails because focus slipped on the first attempt. The idea that 5 minutes of stillness is impossible doesn't come from calendars. It comes from perception. People always find time for what they believe will pay back more than it costs. That's why no one claims they're too busy for coffee, even though that ritual usually takes longer than a short meditation. In research as well, even brief daily sessions under 10 minutes have been shown to benefit attention and reduce stress levels. Put plainly, the time objection collapses once you measure the wasted minutes caused by untrained attention against the clarity that meditation restores. The third myth clings the hardest. Meditation is spiritual or mystical, not practical. This image sticks because it has carried cultural weight for centuries. Yet in workplaces today, meditation is used not for spiritual attainment but for tactical benefits. Harvard Business Review reports that many executives practice to sharpen decision-making and manage stress. Decisions worth millions ride on their ability to think clearly, not on mysticism. CEOs like Jeff Weiner and Ray Dalio describe meditation as central to performance, not ritual. What emerges from the science is clear. It's a form of cognitive training, no different in principle from exercise for the body. Meditation isn't about robes or chants, it's about maintaining a steady mind when everyone else is losing theirs. These myths often pile on top of another hidden assumption, that exhaustion equals productivity. Cultural slogans like, grind until you make it, treat overwork as a badge of honor. Yet studies consistently show that lack of rest damages focus, weakens judgment, and undermines output. Asking someone to work non-stop without pause resembles asking an athlete to never rest between workouts, a guaranteed path to injury. Real performance comes not from running the system into collapse, but from calibrating stress and recovery. Meditation provides that recovery in short, accessible increments. There's nothing weak in pausing. It's how professionals preserve the capacity to stay sharp over time. Humor makes the contradictions obvious. People will insist, "I can't sit still, my mind is too active," right after spending 2 hours glued to a streaming series. Others say meditation is too mystical, but happily spend hundreds on gadgets promising to improve focus and reduce noise. They'll claim it takes too long while scrolling mindlessly for 20 minutes on their phone. The more you pause to notice, the easier it is to see that these myths are flimsy stories that preserve old habits. They collapse quickly once confronted. So what is meditation if it's not mystical, not too time-consuming, and not impossible? The most accurate framing is that it's mental strength training. Each session functions like a repetition in the gym. You notice distraction, you redirect attention, you repeat. Over weeks, that repetition thickens the brain's circuits for sustained focus and emotion regulation. It's not glamorous, not instantly transformative, and not always easy, but it's reliable. For professionals navigating complex decisions, crowded calendars, and nonstop inputs, that reliability is a competitive advantage. The people most in need of it aren't monks. They're those working in environments where distraction is constant and stress never leaves. Think of an emergency room physician needing calm judgment in chaos, or a founder negotiating under investor scrutiny, or an artist stuck before a deadline. None of them can afford to wait for perfect conditions. Meditation becomes their preparation. By practicing how to manage attention under calm settings, they prepare their minds for the moments when calm shatters. This is why so many leaders adopt it, not as philosophy, but as technique. Many leaders use meditation strictly for decision-making and stress resilience, not spirituality. It's groundwork for performance. It's also necessary to acknowledge that while the vast majority of people benefit, meditation isn't universally positive. The National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health notes that a minority, roughly single-digit percentages in reviews, report negative experiences. These include heightened anxiety or uncomfortable emotions in some contexts. The responsible way forward isn't to ignore that, but to practice gently, especially in the beginning, and seek guidance if symptoms worsen rather than ease. Just as lifting weights requires correct form to avoid injury, mental training requires mindful pacing to ensure it strengthens rather than strains. Reviewing the landscape of myths, the pattern is clear. Too hard misreads distraction as failure when in fact it signals the training working. Too long ignores wasted minutes that add up to hours in lost focus. Too mystical misunderstands a practical brain training method leaders use for clarity as something reserved for monks. And the cultural bias toward exhaustion disguises damage as discipline. Each myth sounds plausible until you measure it against reality, and once you see the gap, excuses lose their power. What you're left with is a simple reframing. Meditation does not promise instant silence or enlightenment. It offers incremental training that improves attention, steadies reaction, and reduces stress spillover into work and life. Rather than avoiding the discomfort of starting, the more practical approach is to treat those early distractions or doubts as the normal growing pains of any new skill. For professionals under modern demands, this isn't a luxury. It's closer to maintenance, like brushing your teeth or charging your phone. It keeps the system functional before breakdown occurs. Once myths are stripped away, the practice looks ordinary rather than exotic. It becomes just another routine that preserves your edge. It's less about fitting in with wellness culture and more about protecting the resource that drives every outcome, your mind's ability to think clearly under strain. When reframed this way, meditation stops being something foreign. It becomes something obvious. Of course, not everyone takes naturally to the classic version of sitting still with eyes closed. Some people find extended silence frustrating rather than calming, which leads them to assume the practice isn't for them at all. Before making that conclusion, it's worth exploring other accessible forms of mindfulness that support the same outcomes through different methods. Options that still train focus, but in ways that feel more comfortable for how your body and mind already work. Mindfulness alternatives if you hate sitting still. For many people, the main obstacle isn't doubt about science or results, it's the feeling of being trapped by stillness. Sitting quietly with closed eyes can feel like an unnatural demand on a restless body or a distracted mind. That doesn't mean the door to mindfulness is closed. It means the entry point needs to match movement, energy, or expression. There are practical, research-backed swaps that encourage presence without requiring long periods of silence. The core idea is the same, shifting from automatic, scattered attention toward deliberate awareness. The forms simply adapt to how you feel more comfortable practicing. Walking meditation is one of the most accessible alternatives. Here, each step replaces the breath as the point of focus. You notice the heel strike, the roll of the foot, the subtle balance shift, then the lift. The pace is steady but unhurried. You're not rushing to cover distance. You're training awareness of each step. Walking meditation. Focus on your steps, improves attention, and is easier for people who can't sit still. Studies cited in mindfulness research confirm that rhythmic movements like these calm the nervous system and support stress reduction, making it a reliable option for those who feel restless in silence. A hallway, a sidewalk, or even loops around your living room all offer enough space to reset the mind in this way. Breathing resets offer another simple entry. Instead of forcing a 10-minute session, you take just a couple of minutes to pay full attention to air entering and leaving the body. Use 3 slow inhales through the nose, 3 measured exhales through the mouth. Nothing elaborate, just clear focus on a rhythm you can control. Short guided breathwork reduces arousal and can be done anywhere. Research on breath-focused interventions shows decreased heart rate and lowered activation of stress pathways after even brief sessions. This option is especially useful in quick breaks between tasks or when meetings and deadlines start to overwhelm. Because it works in public settings without drawing attention, it removes another barrier to building the habit. Mindful movement using yoga or Tai Chi offers a more dynamic format. Here, instead of stillness, you follow simple physical postures or sequences with deliberate attention to breath and alignment. The body becomes the anchor for awareness. Mindful movement, Yoga Tai Chi, shows benefits for stress and sleep, with multiple trials supporting reductions in anxiety and improved quality of rest. Practitioners report that integrating presence with physical activity provides recovery for the mind while still feeling physically productive. Unlike seated sessions, movement-based practice can appeal strongly to those who need to do something rather than pause. It trains mental clarity in tandem with flexibility and ease of motion. Journaling serves as a different type of mindful tool. Instead of watching thoughts in silence, you write them down as they arise. The act of putting words onto a page slows racing thought patterns and reveals underlying emotions. Journaling helps process emotion if sitting still triggers rumination. Studies referenced in positive psychology resources highlight how reflective writing lowers stress levels and increases emotional regulation. For professionals uncomfortable with quiet, journaling turns internal noise into external clarity. By placing thoughts in front of you, they become easier to evaluate rather than swirl endlessly in loops. Even 5 minutes of writing before or after the workday can create separation from stress that builds resilience over time. Another option is mindful listening. Instead of focusing on breath or movement, the anchor is sound. You choose a piece of music or the natural sounds of your environment and give it full, uninterrupted attention. This is not multitasking music. You're not checking email or writing at the same time. The practice is simply listening without distraction. Evidence shows that mindful listening can regulate mood, reduce tension, and train present moment awareness effectively. For those who dislike silence, this form creates structure around attentiveness without requiring physical stillness. In modern workplaces, adopting any of these alternatives can be easier through digital support. Large randomized workplace trials such as those published in JAMA found that digital guided programs produced meaningful stress reduction and long-lasting benefits. The implication is clear. Guided alternatives are viable if you dislike unguided silence. Apps and online formats allow walking, breath, or movement sessions to be led in short, structured bursts that fit into daily schedules. This lowers the barrier for entry and ensures people don't abandon the practice simply because they struggle with self-guided sessions. The real point here is not to treat alternatives as lesser substitutes. They produce the same physiological and cognitive benefits because the mechanism doesn't depend on posture. Each practice deliberately interrupts distraction, lowers stress reactivity, and rebuilds focus. Whether you find yourself more comfortable walking, breathing, stretching, writing, or listening, the nervous system receives the same training signal. Pay attention and return when the mind drifts. By repeating that signal, neural pathways of attention gradually strengthen. Evidence consistently confirms that form matters less than consistency. This reframing removes the false barrier that meditation is only for those comfortable sitting perfectly still. If you resist silence, you can still practice and still benefit. If the body prefers movement, walk. If the mind feels restless, write. If silence feels heavy, listen. By tailoring the method, you remove excuses and turn mindfulness into something practical that survives in the environments where stress actually lives. Over time, each repetition builds resilience into the daily schedule without demanding time or conditions that feel unrealistic. For professionals who want results but find still meditation off-putting, these alternatives offer flexibility without loss of effectiveness. They keep the essential skill in place, training attention to notice and reset. And because they integrate into activity, they feel more sustainable. The challenge now is less about finding a format and more about maintaining it. The data and techniques exist, but consistency decides whether gains accumulate or fade. Learning how a small practice becomes a reliable habit is the next challenge, and it's the real difference between short experiments and meaningful change. Building momentum, turning 5 minutes into a habit. Most people try meditation once or twice, then walk away convinced it doesn't work. They sit down, their mind drifts, frustration builds, and they decide the practice has failed them. But what's really happening is not about meditation itself, it's about how the new habit was designed. Behavioral science recommends anchoring new habits to existing routines because it reduces cognitive friction. If you rely on motivation alone, the moment your schedule gets messy or your energy dips, the habit will fall away. That's why so many people say, "I tried, but it didn't stick." It's not weakness, it's design. When new behaviors float without anchors, they rarely last. Think about your own schedule. It already feels packed. Trying to wedge a new practice into an already overflowing day feels heavy. When deadlines stack up or you wake up late, meditation becomes the first thing cut. The brain quickly excuses it with, "I'll do it later." Later never comes. The answer is not more willpower. It's structure. A habit that attaches itself to something you already do daily is far more likely to survive. Anchoring makes a fragile experiment durable. That's where habit stacking matters. Instead of making meditation compete for time, you link it directly to a task that already happens without effort. Brewing coffee, brushing your teeth, checking messages, or opening your laptop. These are natural anchors. For example, if you pour coffee each morning, add a 5-minute practice immediately after. Coffee making becomes the trigger. Some people sit and breathe before their first scroll through notifications. Others pause right before they brush teeth at night. These small adjustments remove the stress of remembering or planning. The practice becomes part of a sequence that was already automatic. Anchoring gives meditation rhythm. Brew coffee, sit, breathe. Close laptop after lunch, breathe. Step off the commute, pause 1 minute before reaching for your phone. Over time, the brain fuses behaviors, so meditation stops feeling like an optional add-on. Miss it, and something feels incomplete. Anchoring works because it erases choice. There's no debate about when to practice. It just follows on autopilot from a routine already in motion. Now consider the compound effect. 5 minutes doesn't feel important when measured in a single session, but 5 minutes repeated daily quickly stack into hours of trained focus. Each practice strengthens attention circuits, lowers stress reactivity, and stabilizes emotional control. Just like financial savings, where small deposits grow, consistency multiplies gains you can't see in the short term. Professionals often abandon too soon because they're measuring in days, not months. But regularity, not intensity, is what rewires the system. Anchored habits replace early fragility with stability. The repetition builds a small but unshakable wall of practice. The circuits don't strengthen overnight, but each session layers on top of the last until the effects become visible. Stress responses quiet more quickly, distractions take less power, and recovery happens in minutes instead of hours. That's not the outcome of a single long session once a week. It's the outcome of steady, repeated acts that barely seem like they matter at the start. The change is cumulative. For habits to stick, you also need to reduce decision fatigue. Leaving open questions like, should I practice in the morning or the evening, creates mental gaps where procrastination slips in. By tying meditation to anchors, teeth brushing, lunch break, commute, you erase those micro decisions. Simplicity creates follow-through. Less choice leads to more consistency. This logic applies across lifestyles. If you're an early career professional, stack meditation just after you close your laptop at lunch. For students, those 5 minutes right before a lecture begins can work. If you ride the bus or subway, take 1 silent minute before unlocking your phone. The details don't matter as much as the attachment. Anchoring integrates the practice into a reality that already exists, so it doesn't compete, it flows. And here is one direct exercise you can try immediately. Pick one existing habit that happens daily without fail. For the next 7 days, immediately follow that action with 1 minute of breath awareness. It could be coffee brewing, brushing teeth, or shutting down the laptop for lunch. Even if it's just 1 minute, treat it as locked in. This isn't about creating instant transformation. It's about creating proof that the habit can stick when it has the right anchor. After a week, let 1 minute grow gradually to 3, then 5. The important part is not length, but consistency. Anchoring also boosts the feeling of progress. Instead of viewing meditation as one more task on the to-do list, it feels like finishing a paired action. Just as brushing teeth isn't complete without toothpaste, closing the laptop doesn't feel complete without a minute of stillness. That emotional closure makes the habit easier to sustain. Over time, the trigger and the practice blend into one thing, and the mental resistance almost disappears. The productivity payoff comes later, but is unmistakable. Instead of operating on empty, you recover energy before it crashes. Instead of multitasking yourself into confusion, you train attention to steady itself naturally. These improvements ripple out. Teammates notice sharper presence in meetings, fewer rushed mistakes, and steadier communication under pressure. Leaders notice fewer missed deadlines and less last-minute scrambling, all from habits that looked insignificant at the time you started them. This is why it's dangerous to believe only long sessions matter. Research shows the nervous system values regular repetition more than sporadic intensity. 5 daily minutes repeated consistently carry more power for rewiring attention than a single 40-minute session once a week. Professionals who dismiss meditation as too short to matter miss this simple truth. Intensity doesn't shape the brain as powerfully as rhythm does. Momentum builds when habits stop depending on mood or motivation. Anchored sessions operate like gravity. They repeat almost automatically. The chain of actions, coffee then meditation, laptop shut then meditation, produces permanence. With permanence comes compounding. With compounding comes transformation. And that transformation is most visible not in how you feel during practice, but in how you handle pressure outside of practice. This is what makes habit momentum valuable. It shifts meditation from a fragile experiment into a steady protocol that reshapes your performance. Once anchored, the act of sitting down for 5 minutes no longer drains your willpower. It becomes maintenance. It becomes a baseline protection of focus, clarity, and resilience. You don't think about whether to maintain it any more than you think about whether to brush your teeth. Done daily, it stops being an experiment. It becomes part of your identity. So the work isn't to find time out of nothing. It's to attach the practice where time already exists. Once embedded, meditation trains the structures you rely on most under pressure. Day by day, the practice builds until the results become clear. And while in the moment it can seem ordinary, even dull, the long-term effects shift from minor to compounding. What begins as a minute stacked on morning coffee grows into weeks of neural conditioning. Soon, the impact reaches far beyond the quiet moment itself. The real power of meditation doesn't arrive in single sessions. It grows in accumulation. And that gradual growth has the potential to change how productivity feels on a much larger scale. The long-term payoff: compounding productivity gains. At first glance, meditation looks uneventful. You pause, follow the breath, bring attention back when it strays, and return to what you were doing. Nothing dramatic happens, but appearances mislead. The practice works on the same principle as compound interest: small, steady deposits that add up to growth you only recognize later. Neuroscience shows repeated practice actually changes brain structure and function over time, strengthening the networks responsible for focus and lowering reactivity to stress. That's why short, regular sessions far outweigh occasional long ones. The repetition reconfigures the system itself. Research shows measurable attention improvements after weeks of daily practice, and structural brain changes begin to appear with longer, consistent training. This is where meditation separates itself from the usual menu of productivity hacks. Cold showers, elaborate planning apps, or bursts of extreme effort may offer brief adrenaline spikes. They light you up for a moment, but the gains fade once pressure returns. They don't alter the baseline. Meditation does. With consistency, the nervous system doesn't just recover faster from stress, it operates from a calmer default state. You spend less energy fighting distraction and more energy applying focus. Sitting for 5 minutes every day is not about the session itself, but about what repetition builds beneath the surface. Over weeks and months, the circuits that regulate attention, emotion, and creativity get reinforced the same way muscles adapt to training. Consider the difference this makes in real-life contexts. Take a leader managing teams across time zones. Early in their career, stress ran the show. Pressures stacked, small mistakes multiplied, and what looked like resilience often masked exhaustion. When they added mindfulness just as a short daily experiment, the shift didn't arrive overnight. The first sessions were awkward. Nothing seemed different. But slowly, colleagues noticed the tone of meetings changed. Crises didn't spark the same intensity. Judgments became clearer. Conversations steadied rather than escalated. The practice was no longer theory. It showed up in the way that person performed under pressure. The compounding process took months, but the returns became increasingly visible as the consistency endured. The unexpected part is how those returns expand beyond stress management. In the short term, you might only feel that you're calmer. Long term, the advantage moves into problem solving and creativity. The prefrontal cortex gains stability, the amygdala's grip loosens, and attention no longer burns energy on constant scattered loops. The shift frees bandwidth for connecting ideas. Professionals who previously felt locked in repetitive problem cycles find themselves combining information in novel ways. What once felt like fatigue now feels like perspective. Years of practice widen the range not by adding new tricks, but by clearing interference that once blocked them. Where short-term hacks push you through fatigue, meditation unlocks the clarity to see pathways you couldn't access in a distracted state. One key point is patience. In the first few weeks, benefits may not be obvious. That's normal. Like saving small amounts of money, the early line looks flat. But just as numbers in that savings account start to accelerate month after month, consistent practice builds a curve of growth you can't see until later. At day one, a distraction might take minutes to shake off. 6 months in, the same distraction might lose its grip in seconds. Day one might show only a slight dip in stress. 6 months in, it becomes clear the nervous system resets faster and recovers more completely from each spike. This is the exponential curve of compounding. For the narrator, this is where a performance pause, literally pausing a beat, helps the audience feel the difference. Paint the 6 months versus day one contrast with pacing, then let the silence carry the point home. A large workplace trial reinforces this timeline. Over 1,400 employees followed a digital mindfulness program for 8 weeks. The results showed significantly lower stress and improved job strain scores not just immediately, but sustained months later. This matters. It wasn't just about feeling better in the moment. It showed that repetition plants durable changes that continue after the initial program ends. Paired with neuroimaging evidence, we see both sides. Workers perform better and brain structures adapt accordingly. This is what makes meditation unique. It scales with time. Like interest adding onto interest, each session builds on the last. The compounding isn't limited to resilience. Over longer spans, creativity gains the same multiplying effect. Regular practitioners reach a point where insights arrive more easily, connections between ideas feel effortless, and problem-solving grows flexible under pressure. Outsiders often assume these breakthroughs were sudden or intuitive. In reality, they result from months and years of training, attention to stay steady long enough for those insights to materialize. The creative payoff looks like luck, but it's the predictable endpoint of sustained practice. What looks from the outside like natural composure or gifted creativity is very often built. Colleagues may conclude someone was simply born calm under pressure, but what they're seeing is the cumulative result of mental conditioning layered in daily increments. Over time, two professionals faced with the same workload diverge sharply. One burns out under relentless stress cycles, the other adapts and expands capacity. The gap didn't appear overnight. It widened steadily, session by session, until the difference in outcome was undeniable. It's also worth highlighting how unflashy this path looks. Meditation doesn't carry the thrill of a breakthrough app or a viral hack. Its power comes from routine. By showing up every day in modest increments, it produces multiplier effects impossible to replicate with short sprints of effort. Professionals who stick with it describe not one dramatic turning point, but a gradual change in how they make decisions, manage projects, and interact with others. The energy that once disappeared into scattered attention gets reinvested into focus and clarity. In practical terms, consistency changes the shape of performance. Within the first month, you might still struggle to notice the gains. By the 6th or 12th month, you realize recovery happens almost automatically. Setbacks that once lingered for hours now clear in minutes. Ideas that used to emerge only after exhaustive brainstorming now surface with less strain. The baseline has shifted. Instead of working to drag yourself back into focus, your system defaults to clearer attention. From there, expansion continues year after year, not because of heroic effort, but because consistency accumulates. This is why meditation's benefits can't be measured by a single good session. The value is in the overall trajectory. What changes when you invest in it over months and years? Focus sharpens, resilience stabilizes, and creativity compounds. The returns are not quick fireworks, but steady acceleration, transforming ordinary effort into extraordinary results over time. Meditation becomes less of a wellness add-on and more of a quiet engine, continuously reinforcing the system you rely on for every decision and interaction. The lesson is direct. Productivity gains that last don't come from chasing novelty. They come from consistent practice backed by biology. Each short session builds the foundation for the next, multiplying until the growth feels exponential. Consistency doesn't look impressive on day one, but by year one, the difference is visible not only to you, but to everyone you work with. The longer you maintain the habit, the greater the separation from those who never start. Understanding this compounding process clarifies why mindfulness has moved from the margins to the center of modern professional life. The workplace doesn't reward short-lived bursts anymore. It rewards sustained clarity. And the conditions of today's world are amplifying that truth in ways that make resilience and focus not just useful, but essential. Why 2025 is the year meditation became a superpower. Look closely at the conditions of 2025 and the shift becomes clear. This is the year meditation stopped being optional wellness and started functioning like a performance edge. Work has accelerated beyond recognition. Professionals contend with non-stop notifications, streams of data that expand minute by minute, and decisions that must be made faster than ever because AI systems push timelines forward. A meeting can end with conclusions already outdated because the environment has shifted again. What once felt like an occasional sprint now feels like a permanent race, and the human brain hasn't evolved to match the speed of those inputs. That widening gap pushes many into distraction and fatigue long before the day is finished. This is why clarity has become the rarest asset. Time can be scheduled, budgets can be stretched, and tools can be upgraded, but clarity originates in the condition of your attention. And that scarcity matters because technology and AI increase the pace at which decisions must be made. Without trained focus, the most advanced platforms eventually overwhelm you. You can sit in front of a powerful AI dashboard and still waste hours if you can't decide what to ask it, or scroll endlessly through analytics without pulling out a single action because your concentration collapses. Tools and calendars help organize tasks, but they can't restore attention once it splinters. Meditation trains the internal system that those tools rely on. Later, I'll show how to test one micro-practice that will reveal how loud your attention actually is. Try it and report back in the comments. This mismatch between external speed and internal resilience explains why productivity hacks fall apart. Time-blocked schedules, perfectly color-coded calendars, elaborate trend-tracking apps, each offers some temporary order. But order on paper does not equate to clarity under stress. Once interruptions arrive or stress spikes, those perfect systems collapse. Meditation addresses the fragility by conditioning the nervous system itself. Instead of masking stress with caffeine or pushing through exhaustion, it rebuilds attention so that you can respond steadily even when circumstances shift. That steadiness is exactly what external frameworks can't supply. The change hasn't just been individual, it's cultural. Surveys over the past 2 decades show use of meditation among U.S. adults has roughly doubled, proving the practice is moving into mainstream life. In the workplace, large randomized trials underway, including the 2025 program involving more than 1,000 employees, demonstrated meaningful reductions in perceived stress, sharper focus, and benefits sustained for months after the program ended. In other words, this isn't just about anecdotes from CEOs or athletes. It's measured outcomes in real-world contexts, showing that daily practice scales and holds its impact beyond short bursts. Ignoring this shift grows riskier every year. Professionals who rely on stimulants or longer hours to power through deadlines may achieve short wins, but the cost accumulates invisibly. Sleep erodes, energy flattens, reactivity tightens its grip, and eventually decision-making quality slips. By the time the impact is undeniable, capacity is already diminished. In 2025, the decline gets amplified because automation escalates the scale of both opportunities and mistakes. One bad call made under stress ricochets faster through systems. One missed detail can alter outcomes that technology magnifies at speed. Clarity isn't just a personal advantage now, it's a risk buffer against errors that ripple outward. Meditation provides that buffer in a unique way. It doesn't promise a surge of energy, it doesn't decorate the calendar, and it doesn't try to stretch the hours of the day. It recalibrates the nervous system to regulate stress faster, return from interruption quicker, and hold focus longer. That foundation shows up in subtle but decisive ways. Meetings run smoother because you remain present rather than fragmented. Reports get finished with fewer revisions because attention holds steady. Strategic decisions carry more weight because they weren't made on impulse in moments of fatigue. The results feel almost invisible in process, but they accumulate into lasting differences over months and years. Calling meditation a superpower makes sense when you map it against how rare genuine clarity has become. Most professionals now juggle constant overlaps, jumping from chat messages to video calls, scanning articles mid-project, replying to emails while half-reading summaries. Attention has become so fractured that someone who can sit, breathe, think clearly, and respond without being hijacked appears exceptional. Their calm reads as confidence. Their consistent focus grounds entire teams. Their stability creates a ripple effect that can shape outcomes across organizations. What seems ordinary on the inside, simply training attention, feels extraordinary when compared to a baseline of distraction everywhere else. The reality of 2025 is that external systems will only accelerate. AI will keep generating outputs faster than we can consume. Markets will keep shifting without warning. Workspaces will keep bleeding into personal hours, and the inflow of information will never slow down. That direction is irreversible. The only adjustment within human control is how we train the mind that processes it all. Meditation is no longer about calm for its own sake. It's about adaptability, the ability to stay steady as conditions churn. Professionals who embrace it build an advantage that looks like composure but functions as performance. Superpower is not exaggeration when you consider its effect relative to rarity. A superpower is simply a capability uncommon in the population that creates results far beyond what's typical. In a year where nearly everyone's focus is under attack, the ones who train to repair and rebuild that focus carve out a difference that widens with time. They don't just manage stress better, they outperform in clarity, creativity, and energy. Their productivity isn't the product of luck, but of conditioned resilience. Meditation has become the performance skill precisely because fewer and fewer people are able to hold unbroken focus in a fractured environment. So the point isn't whether you should add one more tool or hack to your system. It's whether you're willing to invest in the operating layer that every tool relies on. If the internal system holds, calendars, apps, and strategies actually deliver their promise. If the internal system breaks, no external trick will save it. That's why 2025 reframed meditation, not as tradition, not as ritual, but as a central skill supporting survival in accelerated conditions. What people once considered optional now functions as a prerequisite for steady performance. And this leads to one final recognition. Meditation has never been about waiting passively until calm arrives. Its true role is to unlock the focus and resilience required to rise above distraction and sustain performance when pressure is highest. With that in mind, let's close with a sharper perspective on what meditation really offers. Not just rest, but the most reliable path to potential in demanding times. Meditation is less about chasing calm and more about strengthening the way you meet stress and focus through constant distractions. That shift in capacity, not effort, defines a new kind of productivity. The step to take now is simple. Give yourself 5 minutes today. Notice how you feel before, notice again after, and recognize that small repetitions compound when repeated consistently. If at any point the practice stirs intense distress, pause and seek professional guidance. That's part of practicing responsibly. For everyone ready to start, try 5 minutes now, and then type one word in the comments describing what changed. And if this helped, subscribe for more.